So it's great to be with you today, and what I'll do is that I'll continue where I was teed off by Rita a moment ago, and I'll speak about what she called arenas, which is the ways in which competition is transformed, which is what I've spent the best part of the last two decades studying. And I'd like to share a few observations in terms of the exact ways in which the world is changing and what we can do about it. So, first of all, let's think about the change in who are the 5 top companies by market capitalization. And this is a story that you guys may know. But what you will see if you look back in 2006, it's the expected mix. You have a large oil company, 2 large oil companies. You have one of the biggest manufacturing companies in the world, GE, and then you have a major bank. By 2016, you have GAFA and Microsoft. Now, why is it? Is it the case that the world is changing and all of a sudden we're starting to consume technology? Turns out that's not the answer. This chart shows each of the sectors in the S&P, and you can see what part of the total market capitalization of the S&P exists. Now, what you will see is that technology is not at its peak. Y2K, remember, that was its peak. It's gone down, and it's at a sensible level. And the question is, what is going on here? We are consuming more technology, but this isn't really just technology. What is it? How many of you know Ant Financial? Can I see hands up? A rather disconcerting minority. Now, what is Ant Financial? Ant Financial is part of the Alibaba group, and if you want to know how much Ant Financial is worth, when it went out for its pre-IPO, getting a bit of spare cash from the capital markets, it gathered $4.5 billion. It's worth over 60 billion, making it by far the most valuable fintech in humanity. The question is, why? Well, what Alibaba had, Alipay, which then morphed into Ant Financial, is a heck of a lot of data and a heck of a lot of connections to the customers. And what it has today is nearly 500 million people that do payment, 150 million people in terms of wealth management, and about nearly 400 million people for whom it gives insurance. Now, this is part of a broader pattern. And the broader pattern is that the new winners that we see are not primarily technological firms. They don't make their money out of technology. We call them technology. That is a misnomer. It's a misunderstanding. The way that they make their money is by being able to change the way sectors are actually structured. They are the ones that are reshuffling the architecture of their sectors, changing how they compete, and behind them lie new rules for being successful. And that's the important thing, because I think that the competitive landscape is changing, and as it is changing, we change the way that we make money. Let me show you share some more thoughts in terms of how things are changing. I'm sure you would not find this picture to be familiar at all. It seems some people do. Now, if you think about what is happening here, and that's, I guess, the bigger challenge, is that firms like Amazon or Google are really concerned of trying to find Siri and Alexa because they want to create an interface between you and the rest of the world. Industrial companies, service integrators, want to do exactly the same thing. The question is why? Well, consider what these 2 quotes from this year's Nobel laureate in economics say. These are the first 2 quotes that Google came up with. I didn't choose them. Dick Taylor says that the combination of loss aversion with mindless choosing implies that if an option is designated as the default, it'll attract a large market share, and that the choice architect has a responsibility for organizing the context in which people make decisions. So hello world, hello privacy, but basically, hello profitability. What you see happening in terms of the way that competitive strategy is moving, and you can think about how these companies are starting to be embedded in all parts of the value add is to be able to have a disproportionate impact in the way that we make our choices. And that is a good illustration of what has been happening underneath the surface, changing competitive dynamics. So what do we see? We see sectors unbundling, and we see the formation of networks. If you think about growth, you have the possibility of some firms growing without assets. And compare and contrast two players that are involved in hotels. Think about the Groupe Accor, one of the biggest and most successful hotel groups, employing nearly 500,000 people, makes good profits. We teach about it when we speak about value curves and the rest of it, makes 5.4 billion. Now, Booking.com with 8,000 people made 5.8 billion. Why? Because it has managed its ecosystem, it's managed to create the bottleneck, and it's managed to design the rest of the world around it. Now, what I think that strategy in profitable growth is about is who will commoditize whom, and thinking about how you can move into the areas that are not just valuable because they are a good value proposition. That's nice, that's cool. It isn't enough. It basically isn't even the point. So the first thing is to become more important to the final customer. The second thing is to stay only where you have to and think how you can make your complementers more replaceable. And finally, trying to become a bottleneck by leveraging your collaborators' immediate needs, because nobody is fully rational, and the problems in terms of the short versus longer time horizon means that you can try to change and reshape your sector, become at the core of it, taking advantage of the opportunities that others provide. Now, I've been studying industries for a long time, and I'd like to share just one set of examples that comes from the automotive industries. The last 2 days in London Business School, we had a meeting with all the big and the great in the automobile sector. And believe you me, the automobile sector is in turmoil like we have never seen before, and it is starting to change. Now, in the past, you could say, look, the automobile OEMs capture all the value. What are these graphs? These graphs show you which part of the total market capitalization comes to different parts of the value chain. On the left, you can see that in computers, the value has shifted from the vertically integrated computer manufacturers like IBM and Dell, and it's started going to the people making software and CPUs, whereas in cars, for all of the outsourcing, it still is the automobile companies that manage all the value in relative terms. And so far, they said life is good. Why? Well, because if you think about the structure, and that's where it starts being interesting, because we start digging up the underlying stuff. In terms of the structure, the automobiles were a closed hierarchical structure with the suppliers having closed group of firms that they work with, whereas in computers, the crucial mistake that IBM understood a little too late is that it opened up, creating open ecosystems, and Microsoft and Intel grabbed the customer. Who the heck would have known that we would know people with a blue drum saying Intel inside, becoming visible to you, signifying quality, and becoming the ones that capture the value. And we thought that is good, because we've created, OEM manufacturers thought, a good way of keeping them out, even if the cars are absolutely dreadful in terms of helping your communication devices. You can't even plug your bloody phone or iPhone device. Why? Because they didn't want them to go anywhere close. The problem is that the world is changing, and that's what's exciting now, because you have an increasing modularization, an onslaught of technology, and with this onslaught of technology, all bets are off, and we're moving to a digitally enabled, customer-centric world, whereby you have the needs of different players that can be served by system integrators. What we are seeing is that the opportunities are no longer in a sector, but you see meta-sectors or groups of sectors that create ecosystems. Why? Because all of the cool stuff that we now need touches a number of different technologies, touches a number of different sectors. And as a result, you need someone who's going to be managing the engagement with all of that. That's why you now see automobile companies freaking out, trying to retake control of their ecosystem. You also see the suppliers doing the same thing. And the interesting challenge is they don't know how to manage it. And right now, they're spending money willy-nilly. $1 billion here, 500 million there, without thinking how they will redesign the ecosystem and just throwing money to the problem, which is not going to work. So, how can you grow in such a changing context? I think that my bit here is that you need to reinvent your strategy. You need to redefine your value add, having the customer and their digital options in mind. B2B players need to be B2B to C or to stakeholders. B2C players need to be C2B, system integrators of the needs that you're actually creating. Building capabilities in managing and aligning very diverse partners, much more so than you had in the past, and managing your ecosystems. You need to redefine your scope and your business module. You need to purge and divest. You need to acquire and invest. And you need to build a realistic map of what you can do and what you cannot. And it's the lack of reality that I am concerned with in terms of the boardrooms. And finally, you need to revisit your processes, your structures, and your clock speed. If you've got a sector with 3 or 4 years of development time, and all of a sudden you move in services that have weeks or months as a development time, there is a number of decision-making processes that will need to be revised, that need to be rethought, because you are not built for the world that you have. So let me leave you with this illustration of how I see some firms preparing for the future and hopefully start the conversation in what's changing and how we should do that. Thank you.